Let's get started.
Okay.
We're already starting.
Perfect.
We're already talking about AI. I went to one of those weekend law classes, sort of excruciating. We talked a lot about AI. And, everyone has a few, I feel like everyone has their, sort of stock speech on AI. They're like, I think it is partly good, and I think it is partly bad. But the idea of, AI in the law seems like it's one that comes up a lot, in part because exactly what you're saying. Being a lawyer is a certain set of knowledge and skills. And what AI seems to be saying, or the people that are very pro AI, is that this can just replace all of that. This has the same knowledge and skills. But it's kind of scary because it means that no one's going to have those knowledge and skills anymore. And we just rely on the computer.
Well, or some of, the Liam Neeson, I have a very particular set of skillsness of it.
Did you just say Liam Neeson?
I did.
Oh, okay.
That was one of, I forget which one of his action movies where somebody.
I was like, did I hear that wrong?
Yes. Somebody gets abducted and he says, I have a very particular set of skills.
Taken.
There you go.
Yes.
That would have been the obvious choice.
Right.
Somebody was taken.
It's either that or Schindler's List, yeah.
Yeah. But the skills and your abilities are based on then all of the knowledge that you accumulate sort of at the beginning of your career. So a lot of it, depending on what you go into, is front loaded with failing spectacularly or having to do research projects and digging in and finding those nuances and applying the facts to it. I mean, it is a lot in that regard to what you do in law school, or they try and have you do, where you're taking the facts, you're applying it, you're giving an analysis. And you're doing all that for the court. And then when you have that base of knowledge, then you can turn it into being able to explain that in court and argue it in court and find the nuances in the law to question people appropriately and get the evidence in. And so if you're skipping over that whole basic part of being in the weeds for however long it takes you to acquire that knowledge.
Well, I mean, it's one thing for lawyers like you and Danielle, and even Ron, who went through law school before AI, right?
Yes, very much so.
That you acquired those skills, you learned how to do things the quote unquote real way in the in the physical world. But I mean, you were obviously using the internet,
right?
But not
Yeah, I mean, we learned how to shepherdize cases from the actual books, but I have not done that a single day since I left law school because there's no need. I go into Lexis or Westlaw or whichever one you use, and it shepardizes it for you. So already some of the old guard was like, well, in my day we had to go pull the books and then you had to go back and actually manually shepherdize it, and that's how you learned. So there's still some of that well, you didn't do it the hard way. Yeah. And
when
it's
I
not
was in
necessarily
grad
the hard
school,
way.
there were older, mature historians who were like, I went to school and wrote my dissertation on a typewriter, and we had to do all our notation manually. And they had a kind of old school resentment of the young people that were using the internet to do research and to sort of notate and cite all your stuff. But that sort of shortcut thing is one thing. But when I think about people in law school that I'm going to law school with that are using AI to sort of do everything and literally do all the work for them and I don't know, be on discussion boards discussing cases by just ripping it right off ChatGPT, it's sort of scary because it means they're not learning anything.
Right.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, because it's not going into, I forget how it sets up, but it's not going into any sort of long-term memory because you're just cutting and pasting and there's no interaction with it.
Yeah, so we're going to have a generation of lawyers that don't know how to do law, right?
I mean, maybe.
Maybe? Is that too pessimistic? I mean, if Danielle were here, she would be giving us some of the ways that, and same with Megan. I've had conversations with Megan Sherry on this podcast about AI and the tremendous benefits of AI, in part for shortcuts, for helping complete tasks that are really time consuming, that aren't really requiring a whole lot of skill and thought.
Right.
So that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right?
I was going to say that is probably 90% of what I use it for is
Yeah,
either,
what do you use it for?
I mean, I use it a lot. both personally and professionally. So, I mean, I will use ChatGPT to give me an itinerary when I'm going to be in a new town and I'm unfamiliar. I'll have it just give me like an itinerary. And now I've trained it so that it knows my preferences. So it'll put like an independent bookstore in there, and it will use the Eater Essential restaurants and all of those things. So it can be real helpful, just as I mostly use it as a starting point.
Right.
Either use it as a starting point or I'll use it to refine something. So if I need a tone check and there's nobody around to kind of read through something and make sure that I haven't taken an offensive tone in whatever I have said, I will remove whatever confidential information is in that document and put it in there and just ask it to rephrase in a, more professional manner or less condescending, or however I think the tone is coming off, to kind of sanitize it a little bit.
Are you in frequent need of tone checks?
Some weeks
I've
more
never
than
heard
others.
that. I've never heard that term before.
Oh, we use it all the time. I mean, it's usually like an internal email where I've cut and paste something and I'm just like, hey, before I hit send on this, I'm taking a beat. Could you just do a tone check real quick for me? Because I'm fired up about whatever this thing is, and it may be unnecessary to have that level of hostility in that email or condescension or whatever that feels like.
No sarcasm.
No sarcasm or.
So you're actually looking for like a more like objective, professional tone, right?
Yeah, because
emotionless.
Well, yeah, less emotional or whatever than what I've put out quickly, in
Passionate,
my moment.
But not offensive.
Yeah. Yes.
Interesting.
So I use it on both ends, like as a starting point, like give me a great shitty first draft of this, because my brain is just blanking, or I just don't want to take the time to kind of come up with the structure of this particular letter. And once I get that, I can tweak it and run with the detailed information that needs to go in there. So I utilize them a lot. I mean, it's not just chat. I use Perplexity, I use Claude. Lexis has its own AI thing, Protégé, which is very helpful when you're doing legal research.
So it sounds like you're not like that skeptical or afraid of AI. You're using it a lot. Do you use DeepSeek? Have you tried that one yet?
I haven't gotten into that one yet. I've seen some comparisons of it and people who have put the same prompts into that and chat to see the difference. I mean, that's kind of some of the fun too, was when you put the same prompt into the different ones just to see what you get. And so that's why I use multiple different ones instead of just sticking with like chat, because you get different things from each one. Like Perplexity, chat now sort of does this, but Perplexity will give you like the sites of where that pulled the information from. So if it's something that you really want to like dig deeper into, it's easier to kind of go that way. Claude gets real technical and you can have it write like code and stuff for you.
I've never even heard of Claude. Is that CLOD?
CLAUDE.
Oh, like a French dude.
Yeah, I forget who owns Claude. I want to say it's Google. But yeah, it's a lot more technical. Chat, is the more popular one. And then the Lexis one is nice because it's a closed universe and they actually give you citations that are real cases.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing that brought this up this week, is there's news that this is the kind of stuff that gets shared on our email lists in law school that are like, here's the risks of AI, because some lawyer basically used AI to make an argument in court citing all these cases that didn't exist. They were like hallucinations from AI. What do you think about when you hear that? It doesn't sound like you're like literally doing legal research using AI.
I am literally doing legal research using AI, but I'm not using ChatGPT for that, because here's some of the distinction between like a closed universe and a legal specific one, because everything, all that research in Lexis or Westlaw is behind a paywall. So ChatGPT can't get to it for their LLMs.
Right.
So the real cases are all pretty much behind a paywall. There are ways to get it for free, but by and large, that's what is happening. And so how it's been explained to me, and this makes sense, is chat and the others are trying to make you happy and give you a response. And so that's its motivation, for as much as AI will have motivation. And that is why it comes up with fake cases. Whereas I have really kind of gotten into a fight with Protégé, which is the Lexis one, where I'm like, okay, summarize the case law on this particular scenario, and it will give it to me and it will, give me the opposition basically argument that what the other side would argue is like, no, give me like what you would argue against that. And sometimes it's just kind of like, there's not really anything for you to argue because this is what the law says. It's not, like I'm mad at protege, but you're just like, oh, but even in those instances, when it spits out a summary of the relevant statutes and cases, I still go in and pull those cases and read them for myself, or I read the statute for myself, because it can still take out of context one line of not so much the statute usually, although some of them get lengthy and problematic, but like in a case, it might cite something that's not the actual ruling of the case, or it may put you towards that. And so if you just blindly cut and paste that without having read through the case, then you have no actual idea of what that case really found.
So you have to do the research one way or the other.
You do, but it gives you a really great jumpstart. I mean, just getting like that list of cases would, take sometimes a couple of hours just to get that list to then start reading it. So if I can get the list to start with in 5 or 6 seconds, that's a huge savings of my time. It's a huge savings for my clients. And then that way I'm just going through and reading that information, and then sometimes pulling additional cases that those cases cite. What
makes it hard is it seems like law students need to hear this kind of stuff in terms of how to use this technology critically and how to use it in ways that are like, yes, it can save you a ton of time and it can start you off with a great list, and then you have to jump off from there and actually do the research, because it feels like the temptation can be to just use it as a cheat. I mean, there are a few lawyers that are being caught here, but it doesn't feel like there are like a ton of lawyers that are being caught. It seems like a dumb thing to do, in other words. Like, I wouldn't want to go to court based on ChatGPT stuff that I didn't like research.
Right. I wouldn't either. Well, because it's the first thing. So on the flip side of it, when I get opposing counsel's pleadings or their citation of cases, the first thing I do is I go and pull those cases and read them, because sometimes they're misciting or misquoting the case, or they're taking something out of context, where if you read the larger case, and there have been cases where they're citing cases that are no longer good law, like they just didn't do the shepherdizing. So there's always been that level of just like cut and paste-ness to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they took somebody else's pleading that they got from like 6 years ago, and they never double checked any of those cases to make sure nothing had changed. There's any variety of that. It's just, I think, a little easier to be super lazy now.
Well, yeah, isn't that kind of the name of the game with like an adversarial sort of relationship with other lawyers in court, is the kind of like cite stuff that they might not know and like kind of like, name a case that maybe I'm being too like movie about it, but like, name a case that they're not familiar with and get away with something because they didn't catch it.
Maybe, but so we have an obligation to basically provide the court with the relevant information, whether it's good for our case or bad for our case. So even when there's a case that goes directly against what I'm arguing, I still have to alert the court that case exists. And then I have to argue why my case is different than what that case
So it'd be
cites.
Unethical, in other words.
Yeah, you can't just like bury it under the stack of stuff and be like, I didn't see it. Did anybody else see it? But I don't know that every attorney does that, but that is our obligation to the court as officers of the court, is to also assist the judge, because the judge doesn't have every case or statute memorized either. So when you're trying to get them to side with you, you want to make sure you're giving them all of the information that they need to make that decision and hopefully agree with what you have done in your analysis of those.
Well, the judge goes back in chambers and checks on AI.
Right. Maybe. I had it come up the other day, and the irony of it. So I did a closing argument, and I think I cited like 6 cases in the closing argument. Of those 6, 5 were all from opposing counsel's pleadings. So I had pulled them all from their initial argument and pivoted their argument based on the facts of the case that we were doing. So opposing counsel got all flustered and was just like, these are all new. I was like, they're not all new. 5 of the 6 were in your documents. And then they were just like, well, I don't have those things memorized. I was like, right, but that is actually the job here when you're arguing these things. So I took your argument, I turned it, because I read through the cases all the way. I'm not saying that they didn't read through the cases all the way, but when I read through and I applied the facts of our case, what had come in through evidence, to the cases they cited, I got a different result. And hopefully the judge agrees with me. We'll find out.
Wow. It's making me think about like one of the very first exercises I did in graduate school for being a historian, which is all research and citation, was they wanted us to like take a book, like a well-known history book, and research their citations and see if they'd used them in the text correctly, right? They'd made the right arguments with them, etc. And it was like such a valuable exercise because all of us, everyone in the class, found many examples where we went and found the actual source that this author was citing and said they got they got the page number wrong. Sometimes they used the information in a way that was a little like they're stretching here in terms of their conclusion. And I imagine that happens in the law all the time too.
Yeah, well, because there's so much to pull from. So it's not like anytime I'm citing a case, I'm giving like the law school, like full, like here's the total summary of facts. Here's, all the other holdings. It is usually like, here's this one sentence that I'm going to pull. And if there needs to be some context along with that sentence, I'll give it to you. But like, this is what the court found. And here were the factors it relied on, or the facts it relied on this particular case. And here's how it's similar or dissimilar from my case. So you're not giving a whole big summary of that. So it's real easy to pull a sentence from a 12-page holding and make it sound like it means something different than what it did.
Yeah. The cases we read when we're briefing cases in law school, like they abridged some of them, right? Or they're like, this judge actually wrote like 5,000 pages on this issue. I'm like sitting there reading it. I'm like, what is get to the point? It seems like it's contradictory. It seems like they're weighing every single angle. It's hard, in other words.
Yeah.
Like it's a tricky skill. And that's part of what I think I'm concerned about when I'm thinking about like people using AI as a shortcut. Because it's sort of like, well, shortcut to what? Like, how is AI able to do what a lawyer would do? I mean, I guess that's the future, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I similarly have that line of like, hey, it's great for certain things, and you should really be cautious of using it in other contexts because, but that's kind of everything. Like, yeah, this is really great as long as you keep
pencils,
it here.
I want books. I want paper. I mean, looking at the world, and I don't want to get all political here, but like the fact that like tech has become such a like huge part of our economy, of our politics, and everything else. I'm like, what is all this for? How is this doing anything good for us? Part of me thinks like about law firms that are sort of like writing themselves out of existence in a lot of ways, and it seems like, I don't know, is there a contradictory part of that in terms of like just the business of law, where you're thinking like, well, we don't need as many lawyers if we have AI, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there is some aspects. A lot of
people think that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say some people would probably very much think that's a good thing. There are some aspects of what we do that, it doesn't take law school really to do some of those things that we do. And for those, I think that that's great if people have access to the information. I mean, the flip side of it is the very big problem that we experience is just people's access to justice. Their ability to it is still, by and large, like if you have the money, then great, you can hire somebody to do these things for you. If you don't have the money, then you're out cold, and that a lot of times can screw you over in ways that you didn't necessarily need to if there was a program that could have helped walk you through that. I mean, a lot of the divorce cases that I see that don't necessarily retain us because they don't need to spend that money that way because it's so straightforward, but walking through all the forms you need and everything else, if you could have just a program that let you know, and here's how you fill it out, and looked at how you filled it out and said, well, I noticed here you forgot this. Like, did you want to select this option or something like that? I think would be great because it shouldn't be hidden high up on the hill just for the people who've gone to law school to, wield as we see
I get that. I mean, it's like sort of, my parents just did a will, right? And they like did it online, like with a program that was like a Quicken, basically. They didn't hire a lawyer.
Yeah.
But like, a lawyer somewhere could have charged them a lot of money to do that. And part of me is like, well, people with a lot of money are still going to want human lawyers.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get a better. My parents' will was very straightforward. I don't know if they would have gotten like a better will because it was so simple. But
no, but they would have had probably more discussions about what each of those terms mean, and so maybe that changed something that otherwise the program maybe didn't point out for them. I mean, I don't know. As those programs get smarter, hopefully then it is being able to explain it, because that's a lot of my time is just trying to explain, and I call it like translating the law for my clients, because it's not like I'm sending them the statute and saying like, read this. Like, here's the statute if you want to look it up. But like, here's basically what it's saying, and here's what the court is focusing on, and here is why, we need to consider X, Y, and Z. Because how laws are written and how these forms are set up, is not intuitive. It is not easy for people to just pick it up and go.
No, I mean, in that sense, it does kind of make it more accessible in some ways, it feels like.
Yeah.
Because it's always been, I mean, if you don't have any money, it's always been felt like a lawyer is something hard to get. And ironically, it feels like people without money need lawyers often, right? They're the ones that are getting most ripped off by like employers, landlords, all sorts of people. I mean, I remember when I was in graduate school getting ripped off by a landlord, I was like, I need a lawyer, but I don't have money for a lawyer.
Yeah.
And then we didn't have AI.
And I
don't know if AI could have helped, but...
Well, the AI and the automation tools that sort of exist now is something that in our family law department, we're trying to work on a lot this year to get something set up for like sort of flat fee help for certain things, so that you going in what the price is, and we can figure it out, because we're having these other tools basically streamline some things that otherwise might have taken us hours. I mean, I'm using the same things for clients who pay hourly too, but in order to expand it out to people who don't need like sort of that white glove full service, like attorney on call type of situation. Not that I'm available 24 hours a day, but just
AI
really,
Jen is available
but
24
need
hours,
some basic help with these certain aspects, and that's it. You can make that streamlined and use those functions, automations, AI to kind of help you make it better for everybody.
And I also think, I mean, obviously there's no guarantee that paying a lawyer a lot of money is going to solve all your problems anyway.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I was just reading our president Trump, like, really mad at his lawyers for not getting like some thing expunged, and he's like, what do I pay you all this money for? Like, well, you were supposed to do that for me. And they're like, well, legally we couldn't do it.
Right.
Just feels like there's still limits to what, like, even an expensive lawyer can't just buy.
Yeah. And there's still those discussions that have to happen with clients when you get into those more nuanced things, where it's like, look, the judge has a lot of discretion. At the end of the day, at least right now, the judge is still a person. So like, here's your range of options and outcomes. And I know that that's not ideal and it's not what you want to hear. But that would be my concern with some of the AI stuff, is if it's trying to give you what it thinks you want, then not all that information is necessarily going to be correct.
Right, because this has come up on the show several times. I think Ron has said this a lot, is the idea that a lawyer is often delivering bad news to you.
Yeah.
They're not there to just make you happy. No. They're there to like sober you up. I mean, you do this a lot too, it seems like, in
I do.
divorce law.
I think a lot of my clients get very surprised because they have that expectation of like, you work for me. Why are you not doing what I want you to do? And I mean, the reality is I can only work within the guidelines of what exists. I can't go recreate law or write it.
It's an ironic attitude that people think like the lawyer is their personal gangster, when it's like kind of the opposite.
I know, but a lot of it is like the portrayals that you see on TV and movies, and the behavior, unfortunately, of some colleagues over the years who have acted unethically. But
no,
so if that's the perception that's out there, then it a lot of times is surprising when your own attorney is pushing back and saying, yeah, we can't do that. That's actually not even in the realm of possibility. But here's the realm of possibility. And I regularly have clients who get mad at me for delivering that news, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell them.
That's interesting. The AI needs to be a little meaner, needs to be a little more realistic. And if it wants to be effective as a lawyer.
Yes.
The AI lawyer.
Yeah, it can't just
That's
tell you.
That's a dystopian idea of the AI judge, by the way. I mean, can you imagine?
I don't want to.
Or it's just like, this is the result of your case. Like, this is, it's talking about movies. So you took the bar in person, right?
I did.
You did the bar old school, but I mean, you had the internet, obviously.
Yeah,
It was, like,
I
on a
did it on the
laptop?
laptop. Although the first day of the bar, I panicked that I was going to have to handwrite it because my laptop was fritzing out and like not opening. You had to like load a special program on it because it doesn't allow you to access anything but the program that you're taking the bar exam on for
Right,
obvious
yes.
reasons. You can't bring your phone in either.
Right.
But the laptop was not firing up, and it was like 10 minutes before the test. And so the person's coming around with the blue books, like just as a backup. And I'm like, oh God,
That's the
I'm
nightmare.
going to have to, there was no scenario that I practiced handwriting the bar exam in any of my practice tests. And finally, like it booted up and worked, but I was real panicked for
Yeah.
a minute.
I mean, handwriting is kind of a nightmare in some ways. And like, as much as I'm oftentimes very skeptical of tech, I've forgotten how to write in a lot of ways with my hands.
Nobody would have been able to read.
It's exhausting too, I feel
Well,
like.
yeah,
More
especially
so
on
than
some of
typing.
those, like the evidence essays historically are what they call racehorses because it's just like issue spotting, like 20 different
Just dump it
evidentiary
all,
issues.
yeah.
But when you're having to write that, I mean, I barely typed it in time, and I can type somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90 words a minute. I barely got everything typed that I wanted within the hour that was allotted
Wow.
for that question. So I couldn't imagine trying to write, like, I'd write it, nobody could read it because it would just be a bunch of squiggly lines.
Wow. I'm looking at this headline right now. I don't know if you've seen all the controversy about the bar exam this year. Retakes offered to California bar exam takers after widespread issues reported with new test. They tried to go like remote with the bar this year, which was controversial already because they basically outsourced the remote element to this company called Measure with a Z, which is already, I'm like, if it's got a weird spelling name, weirdly spelled name for this company, I'm already skeptical. But either way, Measure didn't measure up. Sorry, and like literally just made it impossible for people to like get into their exams. And there's the person that was talking to me about their experience doing this earlier this year at the law school. They said that they were at home taking the bar, like taking it in like your kitchen or your office or something. And there's like a person in India whose like face is up on the screen, like watching you.
You have to have your camera up.
Yes,
It's
and they're
kinda
like
like
yelling
when
at you.
you-
They're like, telling you to like, sit up and make noise, and like they want you to like, they're checking in on you the whole time. It sounds terrible.
That does sound terrible.
I don't want to do that.
It's reminiscent of back in ye olden COVID days, if you were traveling to get on the plane back, you would have to take a COVID test, and you would have to do it on screen with somebody watching you to make sure that you didn't just fake your COVID
What?
test. Yeah, because I went to a conference in Mexico. I remember having to like leave the morning session because you had a specified time that you had to log in, and you couldn't open the package before. They had to watch you open the package and do the whole thing, and they sat there just twiddling their thumbs with you for that 10 minutes or whatever it was until you could confirm. And then there was some like Wi-Fi component to it that synced up so that they could tell it was the same test and that it came back negative so you could get on your flight.
That's nuts.
Yes. I did have that moment of like, but if it's positive, that means I get to stay at this 5-star resort, right? For a few more days.
The world went a little nuts during COVID. I mean, I'm kind of forgiving in some ways about it. I know people like created a whole politics out of it, but there were some weird things going on throughout. And like, I guess borderline illegal.
Yeah,
too.
but I can't imagine somebody sitting there all day watching me take a test.
Watching people stick Q-tips up their nose.
Well, that,
right?
but like, I mean, for the bar exam,
Oh, with
sitting
the bar
there all
exam.
day, because that's a 9 to 5 or however long that is for 2 days straight. It's only 2 days now.
Yeah,
because
it's
in the
funny.
olden
I'm sitting
days,
here.
it was 3.
I'm sitting here thinking about the sort of misery of the test taker, but the person who actually has to watch someone take a test, that's a nightmare too.
Yeah.
It's just the California bar really screwed this up, it seems like.
Well, I was going to say, you were talking about it last week before the test had even started, that there was a whole bunch of problems. And so now we're in the test week, or the test should, I guess, be done.
It's done, yeah. And they're like, sorry, we're giving you like refunds and stuff like that. But like, to me, like people are really, really mad. Like I'm on the subreddits and stuff like that. Like people like take off like months from work to study for this thing.
Yes. I took off 3 months from working to study
Were
every
you working in a
day.
law firm already? What were you doing?
I was. I had been working at a law firm in Santa Barbara. So I basically quit my job
Wow.
because there was no space for like an associate if I had passed the bar there. So I quit my job. I had no job. I rented a room from like a family member of a family member, basically in Orange County, and went and did my in-person training stuff for the bar every day for 3 months. I would be pissed if all of a sudden you're like, oh, sorry, the program didn't work. You have to do it again in July.
Yeah.
Like I would have had no ability to do that. I was already like eating the 3 for $5 lean cuisines for basically every meal. Like there would have been no ability to do that.
There's also, you talk about just, the ability and job wise and money wise. I mean, they're charging like almost $900 to take the test now, but also just like the mental exhaustion of that, right?
Yeah. That's a component of the test is like, if you can take that mental
I hear people that are like taking it like 4 or 5 times. I'm like, how do you do that to yourself? Because I mean, did you really like for 3 months, like 8 hours a day, sit and pack this information into your mind?
Pretty much.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I hate that.
I mean, I remember feeling bad for taking off like a day on either side of Christmas because I had to take the train back up to Goleta from Orange County. And I was studying on the train, and I ended up sitting next to a couple who had gone to law school. And so they saw, and they're like, yeah, bar exam, huh? It's like, yep.
Lawyers tell stories about their bar exam experience for the rest of their lives.
Right. Yes.
Like we've had like older attorneys, like attorneys in their 60s, 70s, even a guy in his 80s who was still remembering his bar experience, telling us, here's how it was.
Yeah.
Do you think there is that older generation like resentment of like you young attorneys have AI now and you have that sort of thing, but they have talked about like getting rid of the bar. Like they have said like we might just replace the bar exam with like a work experience thing. Would you be like bitter at the younger people that don't have to take the bar? I'm praying that happens, by the way, within the next 2 years.
Well, I think that might make it a lot harder because I don't know a lot of attorneys who would be willing to take that on like as a supervision role because now can skip the bar if you work under an attorney. There's like a certain number.
The Kardashian thing, I think, is doing that.
So you can do that, and one of my former bosses wanted to try and do that with somebody, and I looked at what the requirements were for it, and I was like, it's a lot of reporting by the attorney who's taking that burden on. So I don't know how many.
Almost.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are going to sign up for that. I
Yeah.
mean, I think maybe initially because you assume maybe you get an associate for super cheap, but I don't think it balances out when you think about the time you have to spend and everything else that you're taking away from the business, if that's going to be where it shifts.
That is definitely a consideration. I'm thinking more about like just like it's almost like the bar exam is a hazing, like a boot camp type thing, that people like lawyers, you prove you're a lawyer by going through that hell.
Yes.
Right? And if that experience doesn't exist anymore, and all these kids got their AI machines to do all the hard research of being a lawyer,
right?
Then sort of like, what does that do for the profession? Because one of the things I did I went to ChatGPT and asked them like, what are the risks of using AI as a lawyer? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that come up is like reputation.
Yeah.
Right? Like reputation as a law firm that like uses AI all the time seems like people won't, it like almost devalues.
I mean, it can if it's used wrong. So I think like the big word that's going around now, because, everybody's panicked about AI and it taking your job. Most of the seminars I've been in where we've been discussing use of AI, ethical use of AI, effective use of AI for what we need it for. But what all of them are saying is it's not AI that's going to replace us, but it is the people who know how to maximize AI to help them become more efficient that will replace those who don't want to use it. Because if I can do a task that would take another attorney 10 hours and I can do it in 3 because I get like a 7-hour head start just from plugging in a prompt and tweaking with it and talking back and forth with an AI assistant for a little bit, that's a huge value to clients. And they're going to start to understand that when they're looking at prices and how they're being charged.
Ooh, I hate that so much. You know what that means is that like the smart law firms will have training for their lawyers on how to use AI effectively and how to like not to use it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I had AI write our firm's AI policy. It wrote and made the
insane.
slide deck for the presentation I gave. I mean, obviously I didn't just cut and paste it, but it gave me like the basics and I took it from there and tweaked it, because writing a policy and procedure is mind-numbing work if you've never done it. But if somebody else wants to give me like a head start with some bullet points, I can take that and turn that into something pretty good.
Sure. The professors that were leading the AI discussion at the law school last weekend, they said, yeah, we brainstormed using AI, our AI presentation.
Yeah.
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 Robots talking about robots.
I mean,
there's a book about that, I think.
There probably is several books about that.
All right. Well, thank you for speaking with me. Speaking of books,
Yeah.
are you reading anything?
I just finished something
I have
last
to
night.
put you on the spot. What's good?
So the one I just finished last night is Peter Swanson's. It's called The Talent for Murder. It's a very twisty serial killer situation overlapping a lot of different people and time periods. It was fun.
I sent you that Jessica Knoll.
Yeah.
I didn't send you the book, but I sent you a picture of the book in my hand. You should read it. It's really good.
Yeah.
I'm like halfway through.
Okay.
It's called what? Bright Young Women.
Bright Young Women. Yeah.
And it's I don't know. It's like a sort of fictional take on the Ted Bundy murders.
Yeah.
From the point of view of one of the college women that survived at the sorority. It's so intense and so well written.
Good.
So if
Yeah,
you read
it was
we can talk about it.
I know when you texted me, I was like, it's on my TBR. I haven't gotten to it yet because that TBR is a little bit scary. But
It's really good, and it's also scaring me because I'm reading it at night, and
Yeah.
it's about Ted Bundy.
that is the
So-
problem. I think I
I know he's dead.
I
but-
need another book in between the murder books, especially serial killer books. I'll need a little break, and then maybe I'll dip into that one.
You read a lot of serial killer books.
I do.
My God. Does AI ever come up in any of these books?
Yeah, not the most recent one I finished, but the one before that was actually very terrifying on a technological level. So it's this woman who worked they're called the verifiers. So you basically hire them. They're like private investigators, but like for online dating. So when you are matched with somebody, you have them like actually check out the other person's background to make sure that they are who they say they are.
Wow.
And the ways that they would track people or get information on people, it lays it out in some pretty explicit detail. I know it was fiction, but also I imagine things like this exist
Of course.
in real life. And I got to the end of that book and I was just like, I would like all technology to I want like a safe box in my house that I could just put it in and then nobody knows what I'm doing, because the amount of information that other people can get on you if they know how is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Much
the
more
privacy
terrifying
element.
than probably any other serial killer book I've read.
That's amazing. So it's like you match with someone on a dating thing, and then you're like, I'm going to meet this person, but before I do, I'm going to run them through this machine.
Yeah.
and
Or even
see.
after I do. Like, I kind of like this person, but before I get too deep, I want to make sure that they're not like a total lying pervert or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. But I mean, isn't that like the person on the other side of that is like, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then what does it matter if all your information is known by a million people?
No.
Isn't that a horrible way of thinking, though?
Yeah, I don't love that. I used to make that argument a lot, but then you just start thinking about like having every moment of your day just laid bare for somebody else to look at, manipulate how they're gonna provide that information to somebody else. Like some semblance of privacy.
Yeah, we're in the Black Mirror for sure. Thank you, Jen. Always good to talk with you.
Thanks, David.